Cashomaniacs.
Geo Gearheads.
Welcome to Geo Gearheads. This is episode 422. Seems like a big number, Daryl.
It's not a small number.
It's not a small number, and you know numbers are important. But this is a randomized episode. It's Roman numeral XCV. It seems so. I don't know.
It's actually kind of a couple of big numbers.
Yeah, it is.
And the one number is so big that we can't even share what it actually is.
No, of course not. It's in code. So those of you who know Roman numerals will be able to decipher that code. It will get you actually nothing. But hey, I'm Chris of the Northwest, along with our illustrious host, Daryl W4. You've tuned in to the Geo Gearheads, and we are pushing the gearheads of the Geo Gearheads right now with the Roman numeral system. Daryl, how are you doing this week?
Oh, not bad. It was an interesting week because I kind of forgot that I had geocaching podcast episode 600 last night.
That was a big one.
It was and it wasn't by any stretch the like surprise that it was coming. It was just one of those, oh, it's caught up to me already. But the interesting thing, and GSM's Times 2 already kind of knows what we're talking about because he was watching last night, was that I am apparently the longest running host of that show at 360 shows. I had no idea. I thought it would have either been Xpunk X, who was the founder, or Head Hard Hat, but I figured Xpunk X would have just squeaked out ahead because he was doing it longer, I thought. But Xpunk X only had 318 shows, and Head Hard Hat had 327 shows.
Now, are you saying you were the primary host or you were on the show?
Just on the show.
Okay.
Yeah. And my role kind of changed on that show as time went through. You know, I was co-host and co-producer for a good portion of the show while Xpunk X was on. And the two of us really did work kind of like we do on this show a lot of the time. But there were times where I would take over the show for a while because he had stuff to do and vice versa. So it was, kind of a back and forth. And then Head Hard Hat took over the show, and then Scott took over the show, and he's about 100 episodes behind now. So there's no chance that that's going to be caught up anytime soon.
Well, all you have to do is go on the show every so often. And that makes Scott have to work harder before he can pass you for the number of shows.
Well, he's not counting the appearances because I'm not a host at that point. I'm a guest.
Oh, boy. Okay.
See? So this is how he's going to beat me.
Yeah. So, and he's competitive enough just to do that.
Yeah, probably. But the thing that I realized today was I messed up the count on Cashomaniac shows.
Mm-hmm.
I said it was 500. It was only 260 Cashomaniac shows.
Oh, okay.
So not the full, 500 I was thinking. Then there were 36 Cashers of the Roundtable shows. So with this episode, I've done at least 800 shows about, geocaching shows without any of the specials, bonuses, and the appearances on other shows. Safely, because I've missed a few shows on just about all of the shows I've done. So I figure 800 is good, safe estimate.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I did 360 geocaching podcast, 260 Cashomaniacs, and then 36 Cashers of the Roundtable with 422 Geo Gearheads episodes. That puts you at 1,078.
Okay,
so
I'll take it.
You're definitely over 1,000.
So that means I can retire now, right?
Yeah,
I've done my 4 digits. I can move on.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations to 1,000.
I figure there's definitely a bunch of episodes that I missed out on.
Mhm.
So 200 is probably way too many. Oh, and On a Boat wants to know how many episodes you were on back when you were doing the geocaching question of the day.
Oh man,
that ran for quite a long time, but I don't think it even ran as long as I was on the show, because didn't you retire it before I left Geocaching Podcast, and it didn't start until after I was on there, because that was one of those segments that I think I suggested we do.
I don't remember. Geocaching question of the day was my first introduction into podcasting.
Yes. What, or was it? I thought you were just starting.
I might have been a guest on prior to that.
Yeah. Well, I think I had you on the Cacher Maniacs.
Yeah, I did that as well.
And I think that was beforehand, but I thought you had already started toying with at least caching in the Northwest.
No, not quite at that. Not when I was on Cacher Maniacs. I was still thinking about it. I was like, oh, I can do this. I think I can do this.
Yeah. Well, and as I recall, we started getting you into the segment, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to do my own show. And you mentioned, I'm not trying to compete with you guys.
No, not at all. And and Daryl, you're kind of the godfather of geocaching podcast, and you taught me that it's not a competition.
No, well, it is a very friendly community. There's a little bit of friendly competition that goes on, but everyone works with everyone else, and we all get together and have fun. And it's mostly, at least from what I understand, the same way with the vloggers. It's a community thing. It's all about the community.
At PodCon a couple of years ago, the phrase that kept coming back over and over and over again is that a rising tide raises all boats. And what that means is the more podcasts are out there, the more that people are going to listen to podcasts. And as soon as you get at least one podcast under your belt, before you know it, you're listening to 5 and 6. So does it matter that they started listening to geocaching podcast and now they're geo gearheads? No, it doesn't matter. We're just happy that you've decided to listen to us, that you join us live. You take time out of your week to sit down in front of a computer or maybe a smartphone or tablet, however you're watching this. I know some people watch it on the big screen TV in their living room, that you join us, and we appreciate that. We really do, because your communication with us makes this a dialogue. It's like we're sitting in a coffee shop. And, it's funny how many people I can see by name and they have to introduce themselves in person because I've never seen them face to face.
Well, and what you mentioned the whole dialogue thing, and one of the interesting things was the original geocaching podcast was set up as a call-in show.
Mm-hmm.
And we got away from that because people stopped calling in. Not that we ever had a lot of callers. We'd have, a couple of callers that, sit on the line for a good portion of the show and chat, and they were, like hosts themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we got away from it because it wasn't working. And I was so curious to see how that would work when Scott brought it back.
Mm-hmm.
And he has really made that work. I am so excited to see that working as well as it has.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me think we should do that for these shows, for the randomize shows.
Randomize.
But I'm thinking, if we're going to do something like that, I really would rather have them in here with us as regular full participants. So we might try doing that with the patrons again.
There you go. Kind of a new Cashers of the Round Table.
Exactly. But do it with, our patrons who, we love our patrons for a variety of reasons, but there are dedicated audience that really,
some would call them super fans.
Yeah. These are people who really care about geocaching, not just about podcasting, but they care about geocaching. They care about the community. And in many cases, they have the gear to join us live and do a good job, because unfortunately, it does take some hardware. Not a whole lot, but it does take some hardware to make this sound good.
And, we sound good.
Well, we sound really good, but even to sound like audible, does take some
Daryl,
work.
there are some podcasts I listen to where I love the content, but it sounds like they have a USB microphone in the middle of a conference room, and it's like, oh, come on, guys, at least turn your phones off. I'm driving down the road and hearing ding, I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
But Ian really understands what it's all about. It's always a competition, and he listens to them all like a crazy person.
And he said he'd call in all the time, and we've got to get him on the show at some point.
We should. And
we've had him on, I think, at least once before.
Okay, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember Ian's caching name.
On a boat.
Oh, okay, he's on a boat, but what's his caching name?
Shoot, I don't know. He's one of those boats that floated.
Oh, okay. The rising tide has lifted his boat.
Correct. Yes.
And he's on a boat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, bad dad jokes abound.
Yeah. Oh, Francis says thank you for all the podcasts that both of you do. So
let's move on though, because it's already 10 minutes in and we haven't gotten to any of the feedback.
What a randomized show is.
I know, but we've got a whole bunch of feedback and we got some fun news and some good news. Evilfoot emailed in that we did a great show on Thursday, but this is a couple of weeks ago. That's 420, the road caching show. And sent a link to the trail ride in Concord, New Hampshire, which is their state capital. And he said, didn't see it till it was too late for the season, but I'm looking forward to trying it in 2020. And it's called Scenic Riders. Nice. And this is one of those groups that rents out the rail bikes.
I'm still looking into that for an event for this area. So
that would be so awesome to do a full event like that.
You'll have to come out.
I wish I could. Maybe you can do it. No, that wouldn't work.
The week after.
Yeah,
in between. 20th,
if you could do it like in middle of the week, but a lot of those things don't run except on the weekends.
No, this one runs multiple all days of the week. So
nice. So maybe. But yeah, a lot of those won't run on the weekdays because they can't get the volunteers to run it, or if it is a commercial operation, they can't get enough to pay the salaries or whatever. So yeah, I really would love to do that, especially if there's the caches along the route that everyone's jumping off and get it. It gives you a whole different meaning to the line of cachers, so waiting to sign the log.
Yeah, it does. Hey, speaking of railroads, L&N Railroad wrote to us. They start off by saying the item about railroad standard gauge being based on a Roman chariot is humor, not history. When the railroads were started, they all had different gauges. Each railroad picked what they thought was a good track gauge and obtained equipment for that. Wide gauge was great for carrying freight, but expensive to build. Narrow gauge was cheaper to build, but the smaller cars had limited capacity. The modern wheel gauge of 4 2/3 feet is just a compromise it's just a good compromise between many of the different gauges that were tried. The standard U.S. gauge is something that was relatively late in happening, as in the U.S. railroads in the north generally settled on what is known as a standard gauge, while the railroads in the south settled on 5 feet. Some railroads, such as the Louisville and Nashville, even had lines with different gauges. They were 5-foot gauge line, but when they built a line to Cincinnati, they made it standard gauge. It was a couple of decades after the Civil War before standard gauge became truly the standard for the U.S. For quite a while, the railroads generally operated isolated from others' lines, so having a common gauge wasn't a priority. In some cases, local interests didn't want rail lines passing freely through their town without freight and passengers having to stop there, at least briefly. So a change in gauge was often seen as a local benefit in some places.
Yeah, I knew about the different gauges and stuff, but I didn't realize that was a myth. And
I didn't either.
It does sound like another myth that I recently heard about, which is why I got so intrigued by this. I was listening to another podcast, which I can't remember what it was or where it was, but the whole thing about the alpha dog is a myth.
You mean that there's one dog in a pack that's the alpha and leads?
Right. That is a total myth. And that was based on a paper that was published in 1947 on captive wolves. And it was definitively disproven in a 1970 book based on research in the wild, which interestingly enough was actually done in Isle Royale out here in Michigan. So I'll link to the Gizmodo article that I did find. I didn't find the whole thing with the I want to say it was one of the 99PI or something like that podcasts. I originally was thinking it was one of the science podcasts, but I just couldn't find it. I went digging around and I couldn't find which one it was.
Well,
but the podcast was saying that the author of that 1947 paper had done more research and disproven his own work and spent the rest of his life trying to dispel this myth that he had propagated. And it was one of his big regrets is having published that paper, which had inadequate research in it, essentially.
Well, I am shocked.
You are?
Yeah.
Do you have an exposed wire somewhere?
Oh, oops.
Don't
I'm
touch
not
it.
well grounded. Maybe there's a rising tide in here.
You are in the basement.
Yeah. A rising tide in here is not good.
No.
Daryl, you've thrown me for a loop now. I am without words. I am speechless.
Well, and this happens all the time. We hear, that first news story.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone grabs onto it, and then it's disproven, but no one pays attention to it. So, especially something like the standard gauge being tied to the Roman chariots is such a good story that, everyone's going to bite.
And they were probably pulled by alpha dogs.
only in the Yukon.
Oh.
There is a Snopes article on the railroad standard gauge, though, that I found. And it says, what's true? The standard U.S. Railroad gauge is similar in width to the wheel spacing of the Roman chariots. What's false? That similarity is based much more on coincidence than on inherent physical limitations than a direct line of imitation. Now, the article does have some more stuff, but it continues. The U.S. standard gauge, width between two rails, is 4 feet 8.5 inches. That's an exceedingly odd number. Why was that gauge used? Because that's the way they were built in England, and the U.S. railroads were built by English expatriates. Why did the English build them that way? Because the first rail lines were built by the same people who built the pre-railroad tramways, and that's the gauge they used. Why did they use that gauge then? Because the people who built the tramways used the same jigs and tools that were used for building wagons, which used that wheel spacing. Okay, why do the wagons have that particular odd wheel spacing?
I love this.
Well, if they used any other wheel spacing, the wagon wheel would break on some of the old long-distance roads in England because that's the spacing of the rail ruts. So, who built those old rutted roads? The first long-distance roads in Europe and in England were built by the Imperial Rome for their legions. The roads have been used ever since, and the ruts in the roads, Roman war chariots first formed in the initial ruts, which everyone else had to match for the fear of destroying their wagon wheels. Since the chariots were made for or by Imperial Rome, they were all alike in the matter of wheel spacing. Now, the U.S. standard railroad gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches derives from the original specifications for an Imperial Roman war chariot. Specifications and bureaucracies live forever, so the next time you are handed a specification and wonder what a horse's patootie came up with it, you may be exactly right, because the Imperial Roman war chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the back ends of two war horses, thus the answer to the original question. Now the twist to the story. There's an interesting extension to the story about railroad gauges and horses behinds. When we see a space shuttle sitting on its launch pad, there are two big booster rockets attached to the sides of the main fuel tank. These are solid rocket boosters, or SRBs. The SRBs are made by Thoikoi, whatever, sorry, I'm mispronouncing that name, at their factory in Utah. The engineers who designed the SRBs may have preferred them to make it a little fatter, but the SRBs had to be shipped by train from the factory in the launch site. The railroad line from the factory had to run through tunnels. So this is that whole story.
So GSM times 2 says, so there is a direct connection between the two.
Well, except that this is that myth, essentially.
Yeah.
So this is going and finding out, I guess, where that actually came from. Let me go to look at that Snopes article again, just to make sure.
You're telling me the space shuttle is based on, what?
Well,
150 BC Roman chariots.
Well, and that's what makes this myth so.
It makes it believable.
Yeah. Now that is the origin story, and that actually is quoted from Popular Mechanics, I gather. So that is the origin story, and I gather that's mostly true. But the problem is, it's not 100% true. But I do understand that the SRBs were limited in size by the tunnels.
Yeah.
So it's all a myth, but like so many, it is, I guess, based in some fact.
I love it. That those connections throughout history are what I find fascinating.
Yeah. So again, I think this is largely a myth. As LNN Radio said, radio Railroad said, and as Snopes pointed out, the difference in the gauges and the fact that the Roman roads were not actually the same thing. Blah blah blah. But yeah, I think it's fascinating at how these myths are perpetuated. And in this case, I think it's mostly because it's a good story.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, we'll move on to Curiosity Girl, who emailed, I bought a new Cashmobile a few months ago and I already have some of the items you've mentioned. But by the end of the show, I had a new Cashmobile shopping list. You had a lot of great ideas for health and safety. My only follow-up question is, do you carry all of these items all the time? And what do you use to store or organize all of the things in your car?
Well, Curiosity Girl, the thing I failed to mention is if you carry all these things in your car at all the time, there's no way you can go to the big box store and buy your groceries. I mean, you won't have any room left in your car. So no, I don't carry these all in the car at the same time. Like, tire chains, you don't need them in the summer. So I use cardboard boxes from the big box stores, right? That's, you know which one of the red big box stores I'm talking about, that you can get boxes to carry your stuff out with. And if you'd like to be a sponsor of this show, please contact us. I use those in the back of the car. Now, I usually have two of them. One of them is because I live in Washington State and we're no longer allowed to have plastic grocery bags. I use one of those just to organize the fabric shopping bags in the back of the car, because I hate those things just, flying all over. And the other one, I keep, water and that coat and a candle and a blanket and, tissues and all those things that you may need in the back of a car. And I keep that in there. Now, the boxes do slide around a bit, but I've got just the right size that slide all the way up to the front and go from edge to edge, or, all the way to the back of the trunk, however you want to refer to it, to the back seat. Whatever, is that the front or the back of the trunk, Daryl?
I guess that would be the front of the trunk.
Yeah, I guess it would.
Because technically it's the front of the car. But I don't have anything that I can really provide that's good or relevant to anyone else, because my car has this really cool, like, styrofoam-ish insert that goes over the wheel well for the spare. Mm-hmm. Not that I have the spare, as we talked about. I've got the pump in there, but it goes over that, and it has 3 compartments. Then the floor of the trunk goes on top. So all of my safety and tools and everything go in that, so I don't have to worry about any of it rolling around. It all fits in there nicely, including the spare batteries and that kind of stuff. So it's not something I've had to deal with for about 3, maybe 4 years, however I've had that car.
Nice. Switching gears, Wet Coaster brings up the TV show Connections, and that's exactly what I was thinking of. That showed connections throughout history to different things. I love that show, but it's gone now.
There's a lot of good shows that are gone.
Yeah, if it's a good show, it won't last long.
Which is why we've lasted so long. We're not that good.
Obviously, we're just mediocre.
Right.
But we're the best mediocre show on geocaching you're going to find.
All right. So Tick Magnet had a YouTube comment and asked if Chris is planning a trip to the ET Highway. And this is
Tick
on
Magnet, I think you and I ought to go. I want to do a trip to the ET Highway. I haven't done one yet. I've talked to several people who have done it and gathered their tips and advice. It's something I want to do. Timing is, of course, an issue. And, the planning and I want to go with a number of people. I just don't want to do it by myself. Because if there's a problem, I don't want to be the only one out there. I want other people out there suffering with me. I mean, well, no, it's too late. I already said it.
Well, the ET Highway is really one of those ones you need to have the crew.
Yeah.
It's all about being out there with the crew, getting friendly and everything with, 10 other people or whatever you got with you.
And those big cash runs are all about the people you're with. It's not about the numbers, because the numbers are it's just boring and repetitive.
Right. Well, and the challenge is trying to figure out the best way to make it quicker to get through it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'd like to do one as well, but I'm not sure that I really want to do it without a good group, and definitely want to do the here you go. GSM times 2. I was about to say the same thing. For those who have done it, did you stay at the Alien or not? I want to stay there at some point.
I do too. Daryl, do you remember when they shut down the ET Highway for a bit, geocaching wise?
Yeah.
And the Little Alien, the only hotel or motel, the only place with bed,
hotel and the restaurant. Yeah.
I can't call it a hotel. It's a motel.
Yes, true.
It might be a motor lodge. I don't know. Anyway, it suffered. I mean, they were going to have to shut down and only be open certain days of the week, but it's because of geocachers going out and doing this that they can stay open year round. They didn't used to. So, geocaching does have economic effect, and so do other geolocation games, but we'll talk about that later.
We will. But Chris says that the ET Highway rocks, and having a good route is really everything.
Yeah.
GSM times 2 says it's part of the experience and sets the bar for the worst place I have ever stayed.
Yeah, but you're right. It's part of the experience.
Good or bad, I guess. Wow. All right, so let's get into some of the news items that we have.
Okay, we're going to go to a Coast Guard announcement. The first GPS-3 satellite set to operational. Condition: GPS satellite SVN-74 was usable as of J-Day 13. That's January 13th, 2020, beginning at 1734 Zulu.
And that was the whole thing with, a whole ton of information above it. But yeah, so the good news is,
yay, it's working.
Yeah. And Shriver Air Force Base also put out an actual press release on this that says setting space vehicle number 74 healthy and active means the satellite will be usable for military and civilian GPS users around the world as part of the constellation currently maintained by the squadron. This makes the satellite the first iteration in the GPS-3 family to join the active constellation. Constellation. Yes, it's your constellation prize.
It could be consternation.
That
It
could be
depends on
too.
how much trouble they have.
It goes on to say Second Stops is already preparing for the second GPS Block 3 vehicle in orbit, awaiting its day to become healthy and active. The third vehicle for GPS 3 is scheduled for launch later this year. So here's our good news. We've got one satellite active. The second one will be healthy and active soon, which means probably you'll start seeing those occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Not often.
And
And we'll probably start seeing the level 5, 4, whatever it is, that new signal compatibility rolling out in like smartphones any day now. So we might actually get some of the benefits of the 3s in short order.
Is there any way to know if you've connected to a Series 3 satellite?
I believe the only way would be to check the almanac and look at the vehicle number.
Okay. I don't know how to do that on a GPS.
On a smartphone?
I haven't done it on a smartphone, but I'm sure that's more available than on a physical GPS.
Well, most of the GPSs will have the satellite view or whatever they call it.
And that does show the number, doesn't it?
That does show the number, yeah.
Right.
So that was fairly easy to do. It was tougher on smartphones because you need another app to do it. It's not available through the standard complement usually.
Well, that's not all the GPS news we have, Daryl.
Well,
I know.
That's all the GPS news.
Well, that's true.
We still have a bunch of GNSS news.
That's right. And or satellite news. This comes from January 23rd. The ESA design, that's the European Space Agency, design return link system, unique to Galileo, was declared operational this week during the 12th European Space Conference in Belgium. Now, that's something I think I would have liked to go to. Who doesn't want to go to a space conference? Every time, no, it says the delivery time for the return link acknowledgement messages from the initial emergency beacon activation is expected to be a couple of minutes in the majority of cases, up to 30 minutes maximum, depending primarily on the time it takes to detect and locate the alert. So now the Galileo systems are going to respond to SOS messages from your emergency beacon that you're carrying around with you. Anyone in trouble will now receive solid confirmation through an indication on their activated beacon, informing them that the search and rescue services have been informed of their location and their alert, explains ESA Galileo Principal Search and Rescue Engineer Igor Stojkonovic.
Good enough.
Yeah.
We apologize for the mispronunciation, but
Sorry, Igor. For anyone in a tough situation, such knowledge could make a big difference. So now it's not just GPS that's going to acknowledge those signals. Now we have another GNSS.
Well, GPS never did.
No, it was Iridium, wasn't it?
Right. Iridium, and there was another one. So you had to have that third-party system, like the Spot Messenger or the InReach, and this was the big thing that makes Galileo so much different than any of the other GNSS systems. Is it does have the two-way communication, and it's designed mostly for commercial traffic, being like planes and freight.
Planes, trains, and automobiles?
Well, boats.
Okay.
Not so much the trains.
Okay.
Definitely not the automobiles. But anything that's flying out over the water where it's communication difficult. So, yeah, this is the two-way. The whole point of the Galileo two-way system was it will get track location and stuff for commercial vehicles as well. So when your plane goes missing, you'll know the last place it was. So that's not a free service, but I think, and it didn't really say in this article, I think that they were planning on this basic beacon service to be free.
Okay.
So as long as you buy the device,
the
basic beacon is free, but I think you have to pay if you use it. So if you get lost, you will be charged.
But there's a great possibility you will be found.
Yes.
So
It's worth the fee for sure.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's not all the GNSS news we have, Daryl. There's more.
There is more.
How much would you pay?
For this one, not very much.
Oh. ISS. Thanks, Daryl. You give me the hard names.
Well, I'll take this one if you want.
Reshetnev Company, the primary GLONASS contractor, has a backlog of orders for navigation satellites up to 2025, according to Director General Nikolay Testodev. The orders require production at full capacity to the company's facilities. At any given time, about 50 satellites are in varying stages of production, including 12 ground spares. And they take them and they grind them up and use them for spares later. No.
Well, by grinding them up, it makes them easier to launch.
Oh, yeah. Smaller. Yeah.
Right.
Some of them are slated for launch in 2020. The GLONASS M navigation satellite launched on December 11th, 2019, and entered service January 13th. So the new GLONASS M replaced the retired satellites of the GLONASS constellation that had surpassed its design life expectancy by 7 years. Daryl, it seems like GLONASS is new, and they've already gone to renewing their satellites.
I don't think it's as new as we kind of get the impression.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same thing with GPS.
Right.
But I think the takeaway here is all of these satellites are outperforming the expectations. On average. Didn't we just talk about one of the satellites? I don't know if it was GPS or not. Where no, it was one of the direct TV or dish satellites had to be deorbited because it was damaged. The fuel cell isn't working, and they're afraid of it going poof.
Well, just this week, there was a near miss between two satellites, one the size of a Volkswagen and another one the size of a garbage can. And that's, the last satellite collision was in 2009, if you track these things. So, then there's now another push to let's get rid of the junk in space.
Yeah, which would be nice.
Railgun?
Well, they keep talking about these new little mini satellites.
Yeah.
But there was also some news recently that I wish I would have added to this rundown. But there's a paper from, the early days of satellites where you could do 3 or 4 satellites to cover everything in the world, but at a higher orbit or something like that.
Okay. Wow.
So it's been impractical to make that happen, but they've got this new strategy for it that actually looks like it probably would work. So instead of having 100 or whatever it is little satellites to do internet, they could do a few of these bigger satellites to do the same thing. And because it's fewer in number but more expensive, it wouldn't. And the big thing was the fuel. So like these little satellites don't have the fuel to reposition, so you have to keep launching them. So these bigger satellites could carry enough fuel. They have this new strategy that keeps them in orbit and more secure. So it's pretty cool. GSM ×2, our research department tonight, is telling us that flight tests of the Russian high orbit satellite navigation system called GLONASS were started in October 1982 with the launch of Cosmos 1413 satellite. The GLONASS system was formally declared operational in 1993.
Wow. It seems newer. Now, these little satellites, Daryl, they launch them up kind of in clouds. They are starting to mess with observatories because, as it goes by, they're reflective and it's causing issues. So, we have to have things up in the skies, but, getting them back and keeping everything up there in, from going boom against one another, just a little bit of swapping paint on a satellite is devastating to it. and you can't go up there and fix it.
Well, we used to take the shuttle to do some of those, but
Right.
that's not something that you can do for commercial satellites.
Right.
We'll move on to that article that you kind of hinted at earlier from The Verge in this case. And Pokemon Go live events drove nearly $250 million in tourism revenue last year, according to Niantic. So, all coming from this Verge article. But they said $247 million in tourism revenue was generated from the events. This is not in general. This is just the events. So the announcement was paired with a new schedule for 2020 events across Pokemon Go, Ingress Prime, and Harry Potter Wizards Unite. So they're trying to push. Yes, you want these. But the thing that I thought most interesting was Pokemon Go Fest this last year. They estimated $120 million in tourism expenditures from the attending players, which include 64,000 attendees across the 4-day event.
Wow. And that was in Chicago. Now, this is only across 3 cities. It's
that's the 247 with the Chicago being the biggest. So 64,000 attendees. Can you imagine how many geocachers we're going to have at the 2020 event? And then you try to scale that up to something that big?
Wouldn't that be something?
That would be kind of scary. I mean, I'm sure that venue, from what I'm hearing, could actually handle, 40 or 50,000 people.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we could go to 64,000 people.
Daryl?
Yes.
You want to go to Phoenix later this year?
No, I don't actually.
Oh.
GSM Times 2 says Giga sounds like a micro.
Yeah, exactly.
The Giga is only 5,000 people.
Yeah, and that's more than double.
It's more than 10 times.
Oh, 64,000. I had 12,000 in mind. You're right.
Oh, yes.
And,
no.
What would we even call that event, says Ian?
What's after Giga? Googleplex? Or
no, Tetra event?
Tetra. Yes. Terra. So it'd be a Terra event.
Mm-hmm.
Not Terror.
Oh.
Those are only at Halloween or around tax day.
Or when, Godzilla attacks Japan again. Poor Tokyo. He's coming.
Yeah, one of our picks of the week on the patron feed was the new James May R-Man in Japan series on Amazon Prime. That was one of the more entertaining things, was when he's flying around. Oh, there's Godzilla now. Still, my favorite line from the whole series, once again, I'm accidentally funny.
Oh, poor James May. So I wanted you to get to go to Phoenix because Atari-themed gaming hotels are coming to 8-bit U.S. cities. I had to throw that in there. 8 U.S. cities. 8-bit U.S. cities. Come on, Daryl. That was funny.
Yeah.
They're 2-bit cities. But
it's a head slapper.
The first location will break ground this year in Phoenix. Others in Austin, Chicago, Denver, Las Vegas, San Francisco, San Jose, and Seattle will follow. The main draw of the Atari hotels will be their esports studios. The hotels will have few accoutrements outside of the standard pool and gym. Restaurants, bars, bakeries, movie theaters will also be part of each building.
So this is a license deal because, Atari went bankrupt and sold the name, but the Atari brand is coming back. They even have a console that they're releasing. It's kind of impressive.
We have a retro game shop at the mall here, and my son wanted to go in there, and he's looking at Nintendo and other things, and I go, "Oh, hey, Atari 2600, son, this is my section. These are the games I used to play, and they've got a ton of cartridges." So yeah, I had that one and that one and that one, and they have a console there. Maybe I should go buy it.
So scary.
Yeah.
But the problem that I have with a lot of these older systems is that new flat screens won't even handle them.
Yeah.
They don't deal with the NTSC well. So I've got the Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
and it will not work with most of the games. And then like the Atari Flashback consoles, remember those, with all the games built in?
And yes.
Doesn't work either.
Oh man, now what do you do?
Well, a lot of them are coming out with the HDMIs and they'll work. That's shoot, I can't remember the name of that little Nintendo NES, and they came out with an SNES as well that had all the games built in, and it's kind of like a Raspberry Pi, but they have the HDMI out the back, so it actually works. And there's a Genesis, there's a PlayStation, so you don't have to worry about those because they're HDMI, and it just kind of works. So I do like those kind of things, but I never get the chance to play them. So what's the point?
I don't know. There's got to be a point.
I am interested though in this Atari thing because they're making it all about the esports stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Atari is not the company I would think of
No.
for esports. And it does sound like they're probably going to have, and not from this article, but from some of the other stuff I saw, like they are going to have what they call a playground. And it sounds like they're going to have like the arcade with some of the throwback machines, probably some of the, have you been into one of the recent arcades where they have the giant Pac-Man and the giant Space Invaders?
No.
They're like, huge LED panels that play the games, and it's really fun to watch people doing that. I've never tried it. And one of the interesting ones that I found was a Pong machine that actually had physical 3D paddles and a pixel ball that you were bouncing around in the game.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a mechanical, physical game. So if they do some of that kind of stuff, that could be kind of cool. But, I think they're trying to mix the nostalgia with the esports, because esports are a huge business now.
Esports are huge. I went to a conference not that long ago, and there was an esports vendor, I guess you say, that, took a room upstairs and set it up into that. And that was quite interesting to watch. I mean, it's a serious production.
Oh yeah, it's big money. It gets a lot of interest. So I think they could be onto something, but just the Atari name, I'm not sure if that's the right one. But the developer apparently only paid $600,000 for the upfront rights.
Only.
I'm sure. Well, but can you imagine how much someone like Blizzard would have charged?
Yeah, that's right.
So it is probably a deal, and they're probably hoping to get a little bit of extra off that nostalgia. Because
if there is a Blizzard, we know all our listeners have the right gear in their car.
Okay. Moving on then, Engadget reports on the Apple Watch Connected program. So this is something that's going to get you bonuses for working out at your gym.
It says at launch, why Daryl coughs up a lung there. It's partnering with 4 chains in the U.S., Orange Theory, Basecamp Fitness, YMCA. Hold on. Okay, I did the letters. And Crunch Fitness. And for those listening on audio, yes, I did YMCA. With more to come. Gyms can join the program for free as long as they offer a set of specific perks to members. The centerpiece of the Apple Watch Connected is Earn with Your Watch incentive program that will get you rewards for using your Apple Watch. At Orange Theory, for instance, you'll be able to score Apple and Nike gift cards by hitting specific goals. Crunch, meanwhile, will get you up to $300 off over 2 years of your membership fees. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, and part of the thing that they're really trying to push with this program is the Apple Watch will connect to some of the machines. So they're trying to get people to tie all this stuff together. You get the machine that ties to the watch to give it better information, which then ties into health kits. So it's a win all the way around, as long as you are comfortable with the data being collected and shared.
Right.
So I love the idea, because I like some of those stuff some of those tools that do things like donate to charity for your walking. You have to watch some ads usually, but
Right.
hey, at least the stuff that you're doing to keep yourself healthy might have some good for someone else.
Bounce I have for Orange Theory, but it does not work as good for the band. So maybe just for the lead singer and not the band.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Bad dad jokes.
Hey, Ian says the dad jokes are killer tonight. Okay. Somebody appreciates them.
Yeah.
Now, Daryl, I have a question for you.
All right.
The step counter on the iPhone, is that based on movement and GPS?
No, it's the step counter is based off of the motion processor. It's
Okay.
measuring the type of steps, and same thing with the watch.
So
They've gone and built profiles of what your movements would be for walking. So it knows the difference between walking, running, riding a scooter, riding a bike. Now it does sometimes get confused, but it knows those motion profiles, and that's how it's detecting it.
okay. My dad's having issues with his iPhone when he's on the treadmill. I thought, well, maybe it needs a GPS signal because he comes down to the basement to use the treadmill.
No, and that's why you want to tie in to the treadmill, is that the steps are different on a treadmill than they are if you're actually walking. Especially like your arm movements are different.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the body motion is not the same walking on a treadmill as if you're actually walking, on pavement. And if you're doing a stair climber, it's different. So the phones don't do as well on that, as I understand. And it's been a while since I've read anything on this one.
Okay.
But the watches and the bands tend to do better on those things. At the steps, on like regular stuff, you can actually do better with the phones than with a lot of the fitness trackers. Now, the Apple Watch and the Android Wear devices were actually coming up about the same as the phones were. So at this point, I would assume that your smartwatches are your best devices, but I haven't seen anything research-wise to really support that. I know that the Apple Watch is one of the better ones out there, though. GSM Times 2 said he was talking to some Apple phone users who were upset that when walking with a stroller, the steps did not count. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've been using the watch for so long that I have it on all the time that I'm out, and I just never even think about it anymore.
Does it actually tell the time for you?
It does, but that's one of the reasons I want the Series 5, because it doesn't turn off. I'm tired of smacking the watch to get it to turn on. Because the lift to light, whatever they call it.
Lift activate?
Yeah. Doesn't work for me most of the time. And part of the problem is if you have the sleeve on the edge of the sensors, it still thinks it's covered. So when I'm trying to get it out of my jacket to light it up, it just doesn't work. So I got to smack it.
Stop hitting yourself.
Yeah, I just like to do that. You know what else I like?
Oh, I have no idea now, Daryl.
I like sleep.
Oh.
And I need some, especially after all of that coughing. And I apologize if I didn't hit mute quick enough.
I didn't hear it. I saw it.
Okay.
So that's when I jumped in.
But yeah, we should probably wrap this up because it is getting over our usual to a little close to an hour. But before we go, we've got some last minute stuff to wrap up. First off, I want to thank all of the patrons for your support. If it weren't for you, we couldn't keep this going. You're the ones that keep the lights on. You keep the show going. We really appreciate all of that support. And hopefully you'll appreciate a lot of the little stuff that we try to do, like all of these picks. Hopefully they're a lot of fun. And also for everyone, there's a poll that's going up on the Patreon site, because we're changing up the show notes this week to try something new, especially, I talked about this earlier, especially with these randomized shows with all of those links. It gets really kind of tough to find them. It's a little bit more work if I try to put that into the actual text like I have been for, 8 years now? Something like
Way
that.
too long, Daryl.
Yeah.
Shows.
So we're trying the unordered list. For those of you who know HTML stuff, it's an unordered list with all of the links. Go over there and hit that poll and let us know what you thought of it. So that's going to post a little later on tonight, and we really would appreciate it. Not that we don't appreciate our patrons, but we love our patrons. Mm-hmm. We love all of that feedback, and we know we're going to get some of our patrons to do it. So we posted that poll over there, and we'd really appreciate it if all of you can go and do it, because you know what? Most of that content is available first to the patrons, but a lot of it comes out for everyone to check out later. So go visit GeoGearheads at CacheManiacs.com. Or sorry, that's our email address. Go visit GeoGearheads.com or CacheManiacs.com and hit the Patreon links on those sites. And you can go and check out our site with all kinds of extra content on there, whether you're a patron or not. And if you do appreciate the show, please consider making a monthly donation to us to help keep the show going.
Nice. Now, if you like the show, you're going to like next week's even better, when we have Magnus from Project GC, and he's going to talk about the new badge gen. That's how you generate your badges, badge gen. The week after that, we are going to talk about refreshing the game board again. But this time we have Brian from HQ, R. Reagan, and GSM times 2. Wow, that's going to be a great show.
Yeah, it's going to be a really amazing show. So make sure to check that one out. And check the Cachemaniacs website at CacheManiacs.com for more on the GeoGearheads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing GeoGearheads at CacheManiacs.com or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniacs shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on the website to support the Cachemaniacs shows. GeoGearheads is produced by Chris Offenauer and Daryl Wanberg. This show is copyright 2020 by Daryl Wanberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with the Cachemaniacs.